strong connections to gender. And this, I think, leads me over to our panelists who are also working on this issue, connected to other global challenges, and who will surely be able to inform our discussion today about how gender and re-globalization can be better connected and what they can do to inform each other and the discourses in the respective fields in the future. So just a technicality, allow me to remind our audience that you can post your questions via the Q&A function, so you are welcome also to ask questions to our speakers. And just for the organizational details, we will now have our 4 panel speakers presenting, each for 10 minutes. And then afterwards, we will open the floor for discussion, and you are welcome to send also your questions. So without further ado, let me come to the introduction of our first panel speaker. We have Joanita Babirye, who is a climate justice advocate and co-founder of Girls for Climate Action in Uganda. And Girls for Climate Action is a youth-led organization that is putting young women and girls at the forefront of climate action because of their vulnerability to climate change impacts. She's taking a lead role in offering entrepreneurship training to marginalized and indigenous women in rural communities to create solutions to their local climate challenges. She's currently pursuing a master's degree in environment and natural resources, and she has experience in research, environmental education, gender inclusion, and advocacy in climate policies and plans. And she has recently been recognized as someone among the 100 most influential young Africans by Advanced Media under leadership and civil society. Welcome, Joanita, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, and I'm very honored to be speaking today. Just like Katharina said, my name is Joanita Babirye and I'm from Uganda. I'll be giving my insights into re-globalization and gender and some of the challenges that women are still facing in the face of development and re-globalization at large. Okay, so this is entirely my perspective, also from the experience with working with women and girls in rural communities. And the issue of globalization, just to give also a status quo, currently we see that trends and related policies are often thought to be gender neutral, and that is, they have similar impacts on women and men. However, a closer look at the way they affect people reveals significant gender differentiated impacts. And this is also seen in the different work that I do with the women, and some of the that are limiting them to reach their full potential, but also contribute to the development of the country and globalization as a whole. Because we see that not everyone is benefiting from globalization, and women for whom existing constraints are most binding are often left behind. And I've put this in different dimensions, talking about the socioeconomic dimension, where we see that there's limited access to education. So when we also relate to the global issue that the UN is also still focusing on at the moment on climate change, we see that most of the women are still using a lot of their time in, for example, looking for firewood in case of a crisis, and they don't have necessary tools, for example, to prepare food, and also water. So when they go out with their children, mainly girls, they compromise on their education. And this is an issue that is still standing, and which we need to act on. We also have distribution of unpaid household labor. We see that women continue to carry a larger share than men of the work necessary to maintain families and labor forces, and their work is not paid for in general. We saw in Uganda here recently, 3 weeks ago, women that are staying at home demonstrated to see that they increase their money, that the men are living at home. And it's funny how everyone was laughing at it and thinking they don't need the money. But at the end of the day, this is they're spending their time in giving this particular service in their households. And another one is the growing informal sector. We see that 80% of African women, if they are not engaged in agricultural work, the next thing they're going to do is to engage in the informal sector. And this is the sector that is not yet protected. There are no laws, but also we see men engaging more into the formal sector, and all policies in their favor, to be honest. So we see that in regards to re-globalization and changing the status quo, if this is still existing, then we might not, hit the target or achieve what you want to achieve if this is not particularly handled. We also have access and distribution of resources and engagement in farming. I work with smallholder farmers, and these are really given a small portion of land to carry out agriculture. And the agriculture they're doing is mainly for households, for their own families. And you see that men are still the ones having control over resources. And so they are going to give them, a small piece of land that they are going to, overexploit because they do not have any more access to more land to carry out farming, for example, on a bigger scale that can contribute to the bigger picture of the agriculture sector in the country, but also globally. So we see that, they're still left behind in regards to access a resource that would develop the country, but also contribute to the different factors that could lead to the development. We also have technology. We see that most of the different initiatives, for example, we are embracing technology and working with rural women. We see that less than 1% of these women I work with, I would just say I work with, from my experience, they even have no access to their phones, just an analog phone that is not a smartphone. And when you see that the ICT sector is growing and we are still considering bringing into the gender perspective, and we know that the women that are staying at home, the women that are engaging in these different activities do not even have access to this technology. They can't get involved. They can't have the connectivity to be able to use these gadgets. So we see that as the world is also growing and the economy is growing, we are leaving out the people that are facing these realities. So we see that in as much as the ICT sector is growing, we see that apparently there are still women are still just engaging in the physical activities and not engaged in the different activities or different sector, for example, the ICT sector, because they do not have access. Another socioeconomic issue is the poor working conditions. This is, I think everyone can testify to this. As we're looking ahead on the global perspective, we are leaving out what is happening right now, and also the vulnerability of women, gender-based violence, attacks on women's reproductive health and rights. We also have reduced resources allocated to gender equality due to budgetary cuts. Now, this is both at the national level. I also see it, globally. When you look at, for example, the UN conference on climate change, and we see that COP is happening every other year, we see how much countries or parties even delegating to, giving into to see that the issue of gender equality can actually be supported, that also the people that are facing these realities are also supported in a different way. So we see that we are still leaving them even at a global level, and also as we are discussing these issues, they are not in the room and we are speaking for them. And so we leave out their experiences and realities to inform our different decisions. In my community also, I'll be bringing more onto the local level, because the local aspects really inform the success on a global level. we have access to information. Just to tell you that women are still not, rural women that I work with are still not having access to information. They are not even given a chance to use, for example, a phone, to use a radio, to watch TV. This is still existing. And this makes it hard to change these perceptions if we do not engage everyone to see that, you know, all these aspects are considered as we are discussing these particular topics. This is more also on the access to resources and engagement in farming. We see that women are the ones that are engaging in farming more. And from a country where agriculture is, you know, the backbone, and the sector, the women are the ones that are doing this a lot, and seeing that they are not also supported and they don't have the land to actually carry out this farming for themselves and for also their communities, and also feeding into the bigger agenda of the country, is still saddening. We also have the political dimension. In my work, I engage mainly women and girls into discussing issues related to climate change, climate justice, and also advocacy. And we train them to be able to gain, you know, we give them capacity to be able to contribute to the local climate change policies, action plans. But we see that with the presence of men also in their families, we see that they even do not give them a chance to engage in these capacity building activities. And that is why we need, you know, a diverse way of actually tackling this. If we need to have women into the different sectors, we need to engage men and get to, you know, get them understand why this is very important, and also if we want to change the status quo. There's also the gender ideology and tokenism. We see that in different spaces, women are brought in the room to just make sure they are there, and they're not given the microphone to speak. But the funny thing is, we always tell the girls that we engage with that in case there is no chair at the table, just carry your own chair. And this is, you know, contributing to a wider perspective. And we are now doing our trainings also at a regional level, which is improving also the status quo. The gender norms are still existing, and the gender roles are still existing. And when we still have this, then we can't have progressive communities, we can't have progressive countries. And this is withholding a lot of you know, the opportunity for women to be able to go into different spaces, to speak for themselves, but also to engage in activities that they think are for men. So bring us also back to the environmental perspective, which I'm very much passionate about. We see that women are intimately involved in environmental use and management, and their use and management of the environment is influenced by their roles. The roles are existing, and so they are interacting with the environment more. Some of these photos are some of the women that I work with, and we see that women in developing countries that are having the dominant roles of, for example, production, reproduction. But when we come to environment, they are engaged in, you know, gathering food, providing energy for cooking, for heating, water, and so they become victims of a degraded environment, and this increases the tediousness in collecting this, in contributing to their families, but also countries. Also compromises on for example, the benefits they would give to a country or an economy to grow. So we see that re-globalization has the potential to contribute to greater gender equality, but in the absence of public policy, and these policies to engage women, to, you know, make sure that the policies are really public and women can really understand them and rebuild their capacity. And we see that when we have this public action, then a lot will be ending gender inequalities. Gender inequality is more costly in an integrated world because it diminishes a country's ability to compete internationally, particularly if the country specializes in female-intensive goods and services. And this is what is happening in Uganda. We are dependent on the agriculture sector, and we see that women are more involved. And so if they are pushed at the back, then we are bound to not achieve what we want to achieve, but also following the global goals, we are bound to be very much left behind. So I would conclude by saying they still need to shift relative power within the household and exercise agents of a broader level. We see that the power comes from the households, then it goes to communities, it goes to the country, regional, and then the affecting the entire world. So we need to redistribute economic and political power and transition to more inclusive institutions. We need to focus on promoting the participation of traditionally excluded groups in commerce, job market, and investing in early education. We need to strengthen regional collaboration, and this could really be a huge opportunity. But also could still build capacity of women, because they can be good managers of environment, because they have much knowledge and skills about the different components of environment. And men also have this knowledge, but over different domains. Thank you so much, and back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joanita, for your interesting presentation. I think you've touched upon quite a lot of the connections between gender and re-globalization here. Also on the economic aspect of competitiveness, so that it is really going beyond perhaps the social justice aspect, also a business aspect to foster women's access to education and women's possibilities also in the workplace, and to do so in from a regional point of view, but also moving towards a global scale, and perhaps coming back to the R's of re-globalization that we've heard before. Perhaps we could add another R for redistribution following your talk. So both of resources, but also of power positions and possibilities for participation. Moving on to our next speaker, we will now be getting some insights into the role of men, or the role of different perceptions of masculinities in gender and re-globalization. And our next speaker will be Christoph May. He's the founder of the Detox Masculinity Institute, a researcher and a consultant. And together with the writer Stephanie May, he founded the Detox Masculinity Institute in 2016. He gives seminars on male monocultures, male representation, and critical masculinity. And in parallel, he runs a news and meme feed on these topics on Facebook. Welcome, Christoph.
Hello, how are you? I hope you stay safe and healthy these days. I'm so glad to be with you today. My special thanks to Silvia Gigante and Marlies Blas, and to the whole team of the Eurac Research Center in Bolzano. Thank you for your invitation and for your engagement to plan and organize everything. It's a pleasure for us to be here today, for me and us. First, I would like to show you who we are and give you a short insight into our work. And after that, I would like to speak about the challenges of on re-globalization and masculinities. Please start the presentation now. Thank you so much. And yeah, we founded the Man Studies Institute in 2016. You said that already. We renamed it last year to Detox Masculinity Institute. The great term toxic masculinity is widely popular since thankful to the Me Too movement in 2017. And we use and work with it, with this term every day. That is why. Next image, please. Stephanie May is my co-founder. She is a writer and responsible for the strategy of the Institute. Without her and the thousands of talks on toxic masculinity we had in the last years, this institute wouldn't exist. So now go back, please. So what are we doing? Besides the writing and blogging, we are booked for seminars and workshops on male monocultures. Oh yeah, next image, please. male monocultures or male dominate, or yeah, you can say male dominated societies, institutions, male dominated groups, and how we can leave them, how we as men can break them up. Next image, please. We work a lot with labor unions. Here, one of the German Catholic unions. Next one, with the German Federal Office of Administration, for example, with Terre de Femme on migrant masculinities. Next image, please, with international corporations. Next, please, with the Youth Federation of German Catholics. Next one, please. And yeah, and last year in October, we organized our first Break Up Your Boys summer camp for young adults, together with the Radical Daughters from Berlin in Chemnitz in East Germany. Next, please. This is us at the opening last year. Next, please. We had a political speed dating in the entrance. Next one, please. Short inputs, a lot of talks about masculinity, about male monocultures, about art strategies, artistic strategies to break them up. Next, please. Our second topic is about male fantasies, male representation. Yes, this is my special research interest. We talk about male images and TV and media, and about male-dominated story writing in film and series. Next, please. Most of the time here, we work together with film universities. Next, or acting schools in Berlin, for example. Next, with theater academies in Munich, for example, here to see. Next one, and with art universities. Yeah, this one is from Berlin. Next, please. Our third workshop is about critical masculinity, critical masculinities. Here, it gets like really practical. We work very practically on the question, how can we as men and male-read persons change our behavior, our media consumption, our privileges, our education, our work, our fatherhood, how to work together with diverse teams, how to work together with feminist organizations and institutions. There's so many more interesting perspectives than the one that comes out of male monocultures. Next one, please. We worked with the Fraunhofer Institute on exit strategies, for example, from male monotony, sorry for my English. Next one, we do a lot of group work at universities. Next, and I give a lot of lectures next in universities. Next, please. And on festivals. Yeah, and here you see, yeah, a lot of panels and so on. We also run a daily news and meme feed on the topic in an open group. Join us if you are still on Facebook. And yeah, now you know how we came up with our institute and everything 10 years ago. I am still working every day personally to question my own masculinity, to leave all the boys clubs around me. It took me forever, and we're still going on process to find and consume the perspective of women, trans, inter and non-binary people. And I'm convinced that, yeah, that this is a life work for men and for me. For the second half of my input, I want to give you a glimpse on the challenges on re-globalization and masculinities. So what exactly are male monocultures? Next one, please. Our whole world is very male dominated. It was mentioned in the war was mentioned in the first, in the opening lecture. And their structural power pushes different phenomena like all forms of misogyny, racism, fascism. Next one, please. Conspiracy theories are male dominated. Here you see the guys that are responsible for the reaction on Putin's war in the Ukraine. It's a CEO lunch. I bet you, every one of you have seen it. It's a CEO lunch at the safety conference in Munich in February. All forms of violence come from men. Our prisons are full of them. Next one. Patriarchal men are the biggest threat to our species and the entire planet. Next one. Hate speech on the internet is male-dominated, mansplaining as well. Yeah, we talk a lot about privileges, a lot about men's rights activists, new men's rights movement, like the mytho-poetic man movement, for example, or yeah, all these anti-feminist movements you mentioned before. Yeah, at the end, all these phenomena and many more are called, yeah, next one, please, toxic masculinity. Everything that would advance the world right now is blocked by men. You have to say that. Climate protection, diversity, feminism, equality, intersectionality, and so on. Next one, please. So this is why the male abuse of power is still a worldwide structural problem. Oh no, go back one picture, please. Sorry, it was too early. And why we don't, and this is why we don't have a single country in the world. We don't have a single country in the world yet that has reached 50% equality, 50% equality. It's a responsibility of man to change that. Next one, please. Besides the structural violence, men need to change what they see, what they play. They need to change their reading behavior, their music listening to behavior. Yeah, what they need to change what they consume in general. Next picture, please. So we need to get rid of the same male dominated stories and body images and so on. Next one. No more fighting, please. Next. No more justice of the fist. The man's hand is the last place on earth where you can find justice, by the way. Next one. Bell Hooks once said this, rest in peace, by the way. I quote her: popular culture is where the pedagogy is, and it's where the learning is happening. Next one, please. So we love to use memes and movies and music and literature in our workshops. We love to use all these media to work with people, to work with students, and we need new perspectives that are not male dominated. We show them new examples. We show them how to change their media consumption to female, trans, inter, and non-binary productions and views, perspectives. Next one, please. In the music industry, for example, yeah, it's not only about Netflix, HBO, Amazon, and Disney. It's about the music you listen to. It's in the music industry, for example, only 5% of the world's famous and most listened 700 songs in the last 8 years are produced by women. Only produced by women. So the structural power is still in man's hand. Next one, please. The big question here is, how can we get men into feminism? What can we as men do to support feminist organizations and to change our media consumption behavior? Next one, please. We need, we need more feminist men in social work, in kindergartens, in schools. Next one, please. We need more feminist fathers. This is a really good read, I can recommend to you, who do 100% of the care work. Next one. Check this Instagram from Belief in Fatherhood, for example. This man can talk about his feelings really easy, really good. He's such a great father, and yeah, there are a lot more challenges in re-globalization, in a re-globalizing world, but yeah, these should suffice here for now. Thank you for listening, and I can't wait for your questions. And I hope you did understand me well. So.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christoph. I think we understood you fine, and I think you brought some very, very interesting perspectives and points of view here. So while of course as academics, I guess we tend to always go for the academic discourse and maybe the political level first. I think it's very important also to look at this level of popular culture and to recognize how much this really influences people and how important visibility is here. So both in terms of females having a place and a position in this whole industry, but also in terms of, as you mentioned, fathers who might want to take up a more active role than is traditionally ascribed to men in families, and who also have, I guess, a need or could be benefiting from an increased variety of role models, also of masculinities here. So I would now like to give over to our third speaker for today, who is Margaret McLaren. She is a professor of philosophy and sexuality, of women's and gender studies, and holds the George D. and Harriet W. Cornell Chair of Philosophy at Rollins College, USA. And her most recent book, Women's Activism, Feminism and Social Justice, proposes a feminist social justice framework to address the wide range of issues women face globally, including economic exploitation, sexist oppression, racial, ethnic and caste oppression, and cultural imperialism. And she's also the author of Feminism, Foucault and Embodied Subjectivity, and the editor of Decolonizing Feminism, Transnational Feminism and Globalization. And she has published several articles and book chapters on gender issues, women and human rights, multiculturalism, feminism, and virtue ethics. So welcome, Margaret, and thank you for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, and I'm gonna share my screen too. I have a PowerPoint. And let's see. Let me know, okay. Let me know if you can see it. Can you see it?
No, we see only the top part.
Oh, because I need to center it. There we go. And now I need to make it full screen.
Yeah.
Okay, just 1 second. I have multiple. I'm not used to having all these windows open. Okay, I think that makes it full screen. There we go. So first, I think that you can see the title now. It was cut off before. It's just Gender and Economic Globalization, Current Challenges. And I have to say that my talk is going to overlap quite a bit with the first talk, unbeknownst to either of us, I think. So as I begin, I am a professor now in philosophy, and I have been teaching for 30 years, but I want to just say one thing about how I first got interested in having a global perspective on women, because most of my talk is actually about the global south, and I'm talking to you from India right now, where I am for 3 months doing research. So I worked for a nonprofit organization after college and before graduate school in the US. It was called 9 to 5, the National Association for Working Women. There was a movie made about it, and it mainly was interested in organizing women who were doing secretarial work and office work. And I worked for that organization as a community organizer, educator, and fundraiser for about 1.5 years. Immediately following that, I went to the United Nations conference in Nairobi, Kenya. And when I was at the conference, there's a lot of big tents, and we were in classrooms, and it was the non-governmental organizations part, which is before the official conference. But I saw a fuel-efficient stove, and I said, well, why is a fuel-efficient stove a women's issue? And I learned so much at that conference that I was 25, and it changed my perspective forever on issues about women and globalization, or gender globalization. And you'll find out a little bit more if you don't already know why it's a women's issue. So I'm happy to be speaking to you today. My PowerPoint, I'm talking mostly about economic globalization. Here's an overview of what I'm going to present. I'm going to talk about how women are negatively impacted by globalization. It's important to know that women's economic status is the linchpin, not only for her overall status, including her health and her empowerment, but actually for the entire family's well-being. So looking at women economic issues, I think if you're going to take a global perspective on gender, you have to look at economic issues, and in my view, they should be primary. as Juanita already said, when you take a global perspective on economic issues and gender, you have to take into account the informal economy. It is in fact larger than the formal economy when you take it into account worldwide. And then because of that and many other things, solutions that we look at, they need to be structural. For instance, what I'm going to talk about a little bit in my more current research is organizing workers in the informal economy. I've worked with a couple of organizations that have done that. So I'll talk about that at the end if I have time. So first, what is globalization? We've already talked about that a little bit. Obviously, the world's become increasingly interconnected. Removal of barriers to trade, free trade. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Loans to developing countries and technology. So the middle two things are part of an a neoliberal economic program that really started in the late 70s, but kind of ramped up in the early 80s when the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank gave out loans to countries that were conditional, and they were conditional on the structural adjustment programs. And the structural adjustment programs asked countries that took the loans, well, didn't ask, required countries that took the loans to liberalize trade, in other words, to engage in free trade, to revalue their currency, which often meant that their currency was devalued within the country, and to privatize formerly public institutions. And that included things like education, healthcare, childcare, and even things like water and utilities. This impacted differentially on women because actually, as Juanita already said, first of all, more women are employed in these areas, especially education and healthcare and childcare, but also when those areas were privatized for families that were poor, if they couldn't afford then to pay the cost of sending their children to school or childcare or care for an elder or a sick family member, women bore the burden of that at home to do the care work. So yes, that was a sort of a double impact on women. The next thing, a lot of times when people think, so this is not my slide, so excuse developing countries. I mean, it's my slide, but I adapted it from someone else. So I don't use developing countries, I use the term global south, and we can talk about that more if anyone doesn't know why. So a lot of feminist analysis, the issues of women getting into the formal labor and export trade zones where countries had areas that didn't charge any taxes, so multinational corporations went into those corporations and they hired mainly women. And some people might think, and some people did think and do think that, oh, this is great because women are moving into the formal economy and so they're earning a wage and they're becoming I don't know, participants in the formal economy. But it wasn't really actually that good for women because they were recruited to low-paying jobs. They were often exploited in the labor. They worked long hours without breaks. In some of the job conditions, they left their homes and moved into dormitories where they didn't have very good living conditions. And they also were, a lot of these organizations or factories drew on gender stereotypes of women as being docile, easy to control, less likely to strike. They were, the perspective was they could get low salaries because they were supplemental workers and not the main wage earner. And the most famous example probably are the garment and textile factories. So where I'm from the US, and so the maquiladoras on the US-Mexico border where women are often just, like I said, they're not treated very well. And then of course in Asia, Bangladesh and other places, there's been some famous incidents of women being locked in while they were working and the factory burning. But there's everyday health effects. I mean, those are sort of catastrophes that are horrible, but there are everyday negative impacts on women's health and well-being from working in these conditions. So, but there has been some improvement. There's been pressure on multinationals to improve the working conditions in those places. But what I'm going to focus on is informal labor, because actually more than half of the people in the world work in the informal economy. So that's a picture, the top picture is a picture of my vegetable vendor here in India. People just set up stands on the street. So all along the main street, it's all people selling jewelry and stools and chairs and vegetables. And the other photo is actually from a UN report. So in the global south, the vast majority of people work in the informal economy. And one thing that's not talked about, I think, enough is when you take a global perspective, it means that most people working in the informal economy are people of color. And according to a UN report, so the informal economy, it doesn't have steady work, there aren't benefits, there's no job security, and usually the wages are poor. So the UN, where's my quote from the UN, but the UN connects informal labor with poverty. So it says from a UN report, while not all informal workers are poor, poverty is both a cause and a consequence of informal labor. In many places, the informal economy is larger than the formal economy. In Africa, it's 85% of the economy. And here in India, where I am now, it's 90%, over 90% of the economy. It's a gendered issue, and because in many countries, more women are in the informal economy, but actually overall, there's slightly more men in the informal labor market, 63% men to 58% women. In India, however, it is vastly women. There's mostly women in the informal economy. So like I said, the informal economy is, there's not benefits, there's no job security, there's low wages, there's often health abuses, often, people are sort of put in a position where they have to sell their product for actually less than it's costing them to make. So they're actually putting the labor in. Basically, if they're paying for the materials and doing the labor, they might be selling their product to a middleman and not really making anything, or making just pennies for days of labor. So far, to sum up, women have disproportionately been affected by global economic policies, such as the sort of structural adjustment programs. These also increase their care work burden, and they eliminate many jobs in the public sector, as I said, in health, education, other things. In order for feminist solutions to be inclusive, so I'm from the US, and I've been living in the US most of my life, and a lot of times and I'm an academic, so a lot of times I find that when feminists in the academy write about feminist issues, they're writing from a very US or Eurocentric perspective. And that's actually not the majority of women in the world. So if we're going to take a global perspective, we have to talk about the global South and think about the informal economy. And there's a lot of, of course, there's relationships of historical relationships with colonization, there's contemporary relationships of economic neo-colonization, and it's not as though the global South exists in a vacuum, and for which the global North is not in part responsible for people and the worsening of inequality within countries as well as globally. Okay, so we have to include the informal economy. Women's care labor, including the reproduction of daily life in the household. Of course, it differs vastly in different countries, as well as areas within countries, and especially actually in my experience in India and some other places, it differs vastly in rural versus urban settings. But of course, it differs with respect to class, race, ethnicity, social status, caste, religious affiliation, sexual orientation, and ability. And then, as the first panelist already talked about, in rural settings in the global South, or where I am, I'm in a small town right now in West Bengal. The majority of the day can be taken up with gathering firewood for cooking and carrying water from a stream, river, or community pump for all of the daily needs, drinking, bathing, washing, etc. Thus, environmental issues are directly linked to women's work. And I think that's something that, well, before I went to the UN conference back in 1985, but still people don't realize the intimate connection between environmental issues and gender and women's work. Just yesterday I was out and I saw one woman and her two daughters carrying large loads of firewood on their head, which people, since they're cooking over cook stoves and open fires, you have to gather the firewood every day. Okay, I'm going to, if I have time, let me see, I think I do. I'm going to talk a little bit about the two organizations that I've been researching and working with since 2004, and then I'm going to go to my solutions. So I've been researching and looking at, and I talk more about these in my recent book, two organizations here in India. One is called the Self-Employed Women's Association. It was founded in 1972, and it organizes informal women workers into cooperatives and unions, and that's very important. So I don't research microfinance institutions. I think they can be part of a neoliberal well, anyway, I think they can be part of a individualizing neoliberalism that just isn't very helpful. The other organization I work with is called Marketplace India, and they are a set of cooperatives. There's 13 cooperatives, 500 members. They were founded in 1980. And I neglected to mention that SEWA, founded in 1972, it's actually a membership organization, so it's a union, and it's the largest women's union in the world. SEWA is tremendously diverse. They have midwives cooperatives, they have dairy cooperatives, they have vegetable vendors cooperatives, they have a cleaning cooperative, they of course have a bank and a credit cooperative. Their bank actually preceded the Grameen Bank, which won the Nobel Prize. So their bank was founded first, and it has a savings model, and each member put in about the equivalent of 10 cents, and they have a tremendous capital because they have a lot of members. So I can, maybe if people are interested, I'd be happy to talk more about that work in the Q&A. But now I just want to talk about some general takeaways that I think from my research and my perspective are important. One thing that I've seen that's worked very well in India with these two organizations is organize the informal labor sector into cooperatives and unions. It's important that they're organized into cooperatives and unions rather than MFIs or individual entrepreneurs because of the democratic and participatory nature of cooperatives and unions. So not only do workers, they get paid fairly, they're given benefits, they have job security, but they also have control over their work and working environment because they're members or owners, or they have collective bargaining power. Second, understand the ways that globalization has different gendered effects in different places. Acknowledge the responsibilities of the global north to the global south, both historically and in the present. A second point, but I didn't make it a second point here, or a third point really, realize that gender cannot be isolated from other types of social group memberships, such as race, class, caste, and ethnicity. Use an intersectional approach. And finally, work for policies and laws that undermine structural injustice, both nationally and transnationally. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Margaret, for this introduction also to the issues of feminism and gender studies also needing to be more inclusive for the global south. And also, I think what is quite interesting here as well is the strength of the informal economy, and that we really need to take this into account when talking about solutions, and also perhaps in looking at solutions on how we can steer globalization processes away from this neoliberal capitalist approach that you were describing in the beginning. Also, I think the concept of intersectionality that you've mentioned is very important, and will be something probably that will accompany us also in the discussion later on. Thank you very much. We now have our last speaker for today, Amy Oyekunle. She's a lead consultant at Money Development Consult and the Gender and Development activist. And Money Development Consult is a research and a project management organization providing short and long-term technical assistance in Nigeria. She also holds the position of Director Advocacy at Zonta International Club Lagos 1, an international service organization advocating for women and girls issues globally and in Nigeria, providing healthcare services for low-income women in slum communities and connecting victims of violence and abuse to appropriate government care and support. And previously, she has been the executive director of the Kurirat Initiative for Democracy, an NGO that advances democracy and development in Africa by supporting women's and girls' leadership. She's also been a consultant with Foreign and Commonwealth Office, UN Women, Federal Ministry of Women Affairs, International Alert, Save the Children, the British Council, Water Aid, and SILE Consulting and Nutrition. I give over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Katharina. And thank you to all my fellow panelists. Good afternoon, it's a pleasure to be here. And there's always something about being last. You never have a presentation, but everybody else has done your work for you, so it makes it easier to flow. I would speak today in the next few minutes from my perspective as an African feminist as a consultant who has worked extensively on gender equality or inequality, depending on where you're looking at, and across a gamut of issues. So I want to kind of set the tone for my intervention, as it were. So I am an African feminist, and I understand that patriarchal social relations, structures, and systems are embedded in other oppressive and exploitative structures. And this is the center of my analysis, and as a researcher and as an activist. As Katharina mentioned, in my previous life, I was the director of an organization that exclusively worked on young women's leadership and political participation. And we focused on that because we looked at Nigeria, where I come from, and where I'm presently speaking from, and saw that one of the major challenges that we have is that we have an absence of women, or limited number of women in political participation or leadership. That was where our analysis started from. And we began with several projects. We said one of the challenges was that women never found role models. So when they looked at leadership, especially coming from military rule for almost 16 years, when they looked at leadership, it was very masculine, it was very aggressive, very militaristic. And one of the things that we wanted to do was create models and role models, but more importantly, work with women and young women to begin to shift and change the mindset. Now, I want you to think about what I've said and just put it in a corner, because I would bring it back into perspective. I recognize that one of the reasons why it's important to put patriarchy and systems is that it informs everything that we're about. It informs class, or it influences class. It influences your race. It influences, in my case, your ethnicity, your religion, and obviously globalization. Challenging patriarchy effectively also means that we have to challenge other forms of oppression. And my work is centered around fighting, sometimes physically, but I digress, no, not physically, but challenging all forms of patriarchal oppression and exploitation. As an African feminist, I recognize that my work or my struggles is very linked to my history, my background, my nation, my continent, and my continent's history. And I told you a little bit about Nigeria coming out of military rule, that the only thing we understood for such a long time was aggression, masculine way of leadership, and it still is defining our democracy today. I recognize that part of what I need to do as an individual is to redefine aspects of it. So pretty much similar to what Christoph talked about what is it that I can do to begin to change that mindset and that shift. Every day as a feminist, I'm reminded that while it is ideal, I mean, everybody jumped on the bandwagon of feminism, whether it is from the North or feminism, however you want to define it. We defined us as African feminism because we remember that we're Africans, and what we have to do is deal with the African problem or challenges that we see as African problems that are also global. I'm reminded that I do not speak for other women. Believe it or not, I don't. I'm reminded that I'm privileged by by many standards. I am educated. I'm reminded that I have it better than women, particularly the women that the last speaker just alluded to, but even women that are even within, come from the same place that I come from the same ethnic group that I come from. And so we are not a homogeneous identity. Women are not a homogeneous group. Women are not homogeneous. And I see it every day in the work I do, in the platforms that I belong to, in the engagements that I am part of, that I constantly have to put that at the fore. So it is important that when you do the work you do, you are reminded that women are different. We are homogeneous and there are different intersectionalities. And so the last speaker spoke about using an intersectional lens. So definitely that is important in addressing or speaking to the issue of gender and re-globalization. I always have to bring that forward in the work I do, and that has defined my research, that has defined my conversations and engagement, that has been at the backbone of every evidence that I present to political stakeholders, to lawmakers, to institutional, so whether it is donors or development partners, which also to a large extent also exhibit some form of patriarchal norm or social norms, whether we like it or not. So while they on one hand come saying we want to support women's empowerment, women's rights, they also actually also perpetuate some form of structural social norms that all are sometimes considered negative. Even within institutions and civil society that I work with a lot of men-led organizations that contribute to gender work in Nigeria. They also have that problem. So I started this conversation this way because all too often when we talk about gender, it's not, we don't use those lens of intersectionality. We don't use that lens of feminist perspective that helps you to couch it and put it in perspective. And so sometimes the argument is watered down, and women's subjugation and oppression continues even within the space that we have initially carved for ourselves. The present reality in my country today, and probably many African countries, is that when we talk about globalization, it has done some good, and Juanita mentioned that, Margaret mentioned that, but at the end of the day, when you also put on that intersectional lens, it has done a lot of harm as well. Today's reality is that security, personal security, whether personally or otherwise, has increased, or insecurity has increased. In my country today, insecurity is a clear and present danger every day that I walk out of my house. It's a clear and present danger for many women who are in the Northeast, who live under the constant threat of terrorism, under the constant threat of being kidnapped by bandits or raped or exploited. It's a constant threat not only in the Northeast, in the Northwest, and the North Central today. It's a constant threat not only nationally, but regionally for many African countries. What we see today, again, is shrinking civic space. So the spaces where for women's rights, for rights in general, persons with disability, is constantly shrinking. We're constantly being scrutinized on what we say. We have a process of self-censure because as women, you are very worried about the backlash, because there is a lot of backlash on women and girls' rights and on minority rights as well. There's an increasing number of women who are displaced and men who are displaced. Now, let me also put this in perspective, that when we talk about the work we do, we are not only, especially when we talk about gender, there is that misconception that you're only speaking about women. And like previous speakers have already alluded to, is because women suffer disproportionately. I'm always having to remind people when I speak about that yes, when I wear my hat of gender, I'm speaking about men and women. And it's really important in the country, in Nigeria and in many other African countries, because let me give you a scenario. We cannot have the debate or conversation about gender without men. And I've argued a lot with other feminist colleagues, and they say, oh, we don't need men, but let us put it in perspective. We need to continuously have that dialogue and that conversation. Why? In the work I do, I see that how non-inclusion of men causes a lifetime of struggle or misrepresentation. For instance, earlier this year, legislators, 106 of them in my country, or is it more, overwhelmingly voted against 5 out of 68 bills. Now, those 5 bills were bills that were to promote opportunities for women in political parties, governance, and society at large. There were bills to grant citizenship to foreign-born husbands of Nigerian women. Now, already Nigerian men have that privilege. So if you're married to a foreigner, your wife automatically becomes a Nigerian citizen by virtue of the fact that you are a Nigerian man. But women don't have that privilege. One of the bills also focused on allocation of 35% of political appointments to women, while another sought for 118 extra seats for women in the national and state houses of assembly. Why is this important? It's important because in Nigeria today, women occupy less than 8%. It's apparently 6%, but it's a little lower. And the chances of it actually being higher in the next political dispensation is actually very slim. It's like with every political dispensation, it gets less and less. And so we wanted extra seats for women to give them that opportunity and affirmative action, if you will. Now, all these bills were rejected. They were thrown out for very flimsy excuse of, oh, if we give them women the privilege, they will take over. Women don't know what they're doing. What do they mean? And this is a country where when we had COVID-19, the pandemic, which we still have, a lot of women were affected. There was a high alert of sexual and gender-based violence. There has been an increase of cyber violence and stalking, online violence of women, increase of trafficking of girls and women, particularly with the conflict in the Northeast and conflict in other places. I mean, this is a country that, if we want to talk about crisis, I kid you not, we are in one. But yet, those bills that could support were not considered, they were kicked out. The Gender and Equal Opportunities Bill, which is a major bill that is the embodiment of the Convention of the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and other aspects of the Maputo Protocol, has been presented over and over and over again in the House, in our Senate. Now, consistently, every time it's presented, there's always a reason. Oh, it pushes abortion. Oh, it pushes same-sex. Oh, I mean, there's always one reason or another why it is kicked out. And the question is, why is that? Why do we have to struggle, as it were, to speak to the bills that would and that do support not just women and girls, but men and boys? And the reason I find, in the course of my work, is that there's that understanding, first and foremost, the fact that when you talk about gender, it only specifically speaks to women, but also that non-acknowledgement of men's, of the challenges or issues that men also face when it comes to speaking about gender. And so we find that there are a lot of men who exhibit and exemplify and practice, whether you want to call it toxic masculinity or negative way of leadership or rulership, because that is the only way they understand, and that is all they've ever known. Now, most of these things are sometimes often supported by cultural beliefs and social beliefs, which in many places we want to hold on to that and say that is static, nothing can change. And there's always that constant need to reorient, re-strategize, communicate what it is that we're talking about. And so it is necessary and important that if we're discussing the conversation about doing gender and re-globalization, that do what we do, which is first and foremost understanding from a very contextual analysis. And it's always useful to do that, because when we do it from a gender analysis, even in the work I do, we find that oh, there's a reason why they behave that way differently. It's not justified, but in terms of explaining, in terms of, I mean, showing what Christoph is showing and how to deal, it helps us deal with it better. And we find that we have a better response in the work that we do. Now, what is men's role, so to speak? Men's role is non-negotiable, as well as women's role. Men need to recognize and understand the privileges that they have, but also women need to understand that we also have privileges. I recognize every day that I speak that I'm privileged. And these privileges allow us to have power, or exhibit power in a different way. And this power is what we're looking at when we have that conversation. So that it has to be couched very strongly in that debate. It has to be couched in when we're talking about re-globalization. Who has power? Men over women, state, ethnic group over another, one religious group over another, one country over another. This is what we're talking about. So it needs to be put there at perspective. We need to understand how this determine or influence either masculinities or how we look at things, how it influences leadership, how it influences management, how it influences, like you said, role and supply chain, whether it is vaccines, whether it is seeds or fertilizers, how does it work? And we almost need to communicate that back to those in power or those in authority. It almost has to be a daily reminder. It has to be incorporated into our education system. I'm very proud to be associated with this webinar because it shows that there is hope where people are learning how to do things differently. But we also need to help each other learn and unlearn many of the practices that has led to some of the issues that we are highlighting today. We need to consistently preach and practice these new types of leadership. We need to institutionalize them in our structures, in our policies, in our work. Finally, before I end, I would like to say that the way I see gender is not separate. It's not a separate conversation. It's not an add-on. It actually is intertwined in everything that we see today, in most of the global challenges that we see today. There is no issue that you talk about, whether it is climate change, food insecurity, conflict, that gender is not pivotal, that it's not important, that it's not center stage. And so for me, it is a no-brainer. And part of the recommendations I would ask, I would like to present or prefer is there needs to be increased and improved support for organizations in global south or developing countries, Margaret, whatever you seek to call it, but for organizations that work actively in gender and women's rights and men's rights with access, opportunities and platforms to contribute to this debate. So again, thank you for inviting me for this debate. That intersectional approach is pivotal, is critical, feminist intersectional approach. And finally, we do have laws and policies that are existing. And perhaps what needs to also be done is look at how those policies and laws can be audited with a gender lens and see how they can be improved. Thank you very much. I hand over back to you, Katharina.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amy, for your insights here on these topics, also on the issue of female security or violence that women are subjected to, which is also a very important topic in this regard. And I think you mentioned also the learning and unlearning of practices, which I guess is also a common denominator for many of our panelists today and their work. I would like to come back to the issue of intersectionality for the first round of discussions. And I think Margaret mentioned it also in her talk, that there is a discussion about Eurocentric nature of the gender discourse, which doesn't really take the life realities of the global south into account. Amy, you said it as well, that the perspectives are differing. I would like to ask you now about your views on the connection between gender and re-globalization, whether this could be an opportunity to overcome this north-south divide and to make for a more inclusive discourse, and whether intersectionality, so focusing not only on gender, but really on the overlapping of different dimensions of diversity and also of different contexts, whether this could be something that we need to focus on more strongly also as part of a re-globalized framework. So perhaps we can start with Joanita again first.
Thank you so much. I'd like to say that from my perspective, we see that most of the research that has been done and most of the research that is done Then also in the Global South, we see that I'll agree with the previous speaker on the Eurocentric nature of the research that is going on right now. Also, when it comes to implementation of this research, we see that those that are most affected are left out when it comes to rolling out this research and also informing. So we bring the Eurocentric nature into research, and then after that, we go on to implement it also in the Global South. So we see that, for example, this makes it very difficult to move from one stage to the other. And also, if we involved the people that are really into these different communities, which would bring a better perspective in the different research that we are making and also informing our decisions at the end of the day. So for me, I feel still we need to still make sure that the research that is done by, for example, people in Africa, researchers in Africa, is also not, for example, taken for granted. And also their research is implemented because it comes with an experience, it comes with the reality, and the solutions, for example, are also reality-based. So I feel this is something that we need to work on. Also, when it comes to the issue of the intersectionality, so we see that we have different issues that are happening right now and the global issues. And if, for example, we treat each issue differently, we might not achieve what we want to achieve on the global perspective. And so, for example, if you see that, for example, where I work in the environment and climate world, we see that it's a full chain. When we see that, when we say that women are engaged in the daily, for example, they take care of the environment, they are engaging the environment a lot more. In case of, for example, a crisis or a flood, they are not going to be able to access water, they're not going to be able to access SRHR, they're not going to be able to access food. And so, something that, starts as, for example, a flood is affecting their education, since they have to walk long distances to access this resource. They have to, children, girls have to drop out of school because the schools are now no more. And also we see that, access to services becomes totally difficult. So as we are thinking about re-globalization and also the different factors, bringing them together is, for me, most important, because each of them really have an impact on the other. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is something that perhaps came out very well also in the previous talks. This dependence of the individuals, the individual environment, and of the differing parts that really can't be looked at in division or separately from each other. Christoph, is this intersectional framework also something that you are touching upon in your workshops or in your trainings?
Yeah, intersectionality is a huge topic. Man must know a lot, learn about all forms of discrimination, and a man must speak about male violence, male power, male privileges. And yeah, we need to break up all our conscious and unconscious defensive strategies of man. We learned in 4,000 to 6,000 years of patriarchy. And yeah, but I want to notice that breaking up male-dominated societies is or should not be a female issue or task. It is the main task for men. And yeah, intersectionality is a huge topic in our workshops.
Thank you. So it's really something that is concerning, I guess, across contexts and also across groups of people. Margaret, you were talking about the intersectional or the different diversity dimensions already before. So what do you think about the connection between re-globalization and maybe creating a more inclusive discourse?
Well, I think it's essential to create a more inclusive discourse, right? If we're going to talk about re-globalization, because, I mean, and just, I mean, actually, I think it was Juanita who said about centering, right, that I wrote it down, but so anyway, I think we need to center the people's voices who are most affected, right? So you have to include, like, if you're going to talk about environmental issues in Uganda, right, you need to have people in Uganda on the ground who are your partners, and not just, I mean, as Amy pointed out, a lot of times people who are working on, you know, so-called development issues and poverty issues themselves are privileged, like the organizations that I worked with in India. The woman who started Sewa, she was trained as a lawyer, right? So she was privileged economically and educationally. And the person who started Marketplace India, she had a master's in social work. So I think, but what I really liked about those two groups is they actually centered the voices of the rural women they were working with, mostly rural, but some urban. But in terms of intersectionality, I think it's essential that we have an intersectional lens in two ways, actually. One is in terms of looking at the ways that different oppressions and structural oppressions intersect and sort of combine, and we stand in different relations. As Amy said, we all have privilege and power, and depending on our own social group identities, we have privilege and power in different ways. But there's a second way that I think that intersectionality is important, and actually all of us have touched on this as well, and that is that intersectionality in terms of when you think of gender, you can't, for instance, my story about going to the UN conference, I thought of gender as isolated from things like fuel efficient stoves, right? Because I'm from the US, so I had an ethnocentric perspective. So I think when I think of intersectionality, I don't just think of social group identities like race and class and ethnicity. I now think of it in terms of the ways that we have to think about gender, and the way that gender sort of is implied or is integral, right? As Amy said, is integrated into everything that we do. We can't, you know, I don't think we could actually have a conversation about re-globalization that didn't not just include gender, but didn't center gender. So that's my perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. I think this is also something that is perhaps central to our discourse here today. So really, that this is a topic that is that influences or that informs so many other issues that are connected with re-globalization and with also perhaps the problems that our world faces in this time. So yeah, that's a very important point as well. So for Amy, we actually have a connection or a question that connects to this from the audience. So someone was asking whether you could discuss further examples of how an intersectional framework might be dangerous. And the person is asking because they came across this position in Indigenous Studies scholars in the US. And they're wondering if the danger of intersectionality lies within that it's not inclusive of all genders.
So I saw that question and I was thinking, why did she ask me? Ask Margaret or ask Juanita or ask Christoph. But in thinking of how to respond, let me use examples. I love to speak from examples. I think part of the challenge is a lot of people don't understand what intersectionality means. That's the truth, even among feminists or even now in our kind of work. So we, like Margaret said, we live it at class, race, and black, white, brown, green. Do we have green people? You know, we leave it at that very peripheral way of understanding, and that in itself, because to be honest, if we sit down as researchers or as analysts and we apply an intersectional lens, we will always see that, yeah, this is a girl from India, but is she educated? Is she not educated? Is she from a caste system? Is she not from a caste? Is she older or younger? You would see the different levels of intersection. And I think for us in Africa, or let me say Nigeria, part of, again, what we understand is when you talk about intersection, your mind goes to you're only talking about specifically to LGBTQ, you're only talking about, you know, so it's people are shaping that definition how they want it. And particularly when it's not understood, there is that danger, as it were, speaking to the person's point, there is that danger of misrepresenting or misrepresentation. And so for us, I'll give you an example. I was doing a gender training and I was specifically told, when you talk about intersection, don't bring it in as a term. So we're talking about gender terminologies, and they didn't want me to speak about intersection because in that country, this is how they understood it to be. And we didn't want to go down that rabbit hole of trying to explain what it is not. And yes, it can be dangerous, but if we apply it in a way that we have said, I think Margaret defined it very well. There are primary diversities, there are secondary diversities. If we're looking at it from that context, then it makes a better understanding of what it means to apply an intersectional lens. I hope I have answered the question, or at least attempted to, but if I haven't, you know, give it to Margaret or Christoph.
I think you did a very good job in explaining or in giving further insights on the issue. So maybe for a final round, as we are already nearing 4 p.m. and the end of our discussion today, maybe let's come back to the connection between gender and re-globalization. So we've heard that really gender informs many of the prominent issues that we are facing today. So from climate change to health to inequalities, all of these issues also have a gender perspective. So my question to you now would be, is there, or where in your opinion would you see the possibilities for a shared approach between looking at gender and re-globalization, and perhaps combining these two concepts to be able to move forward to achieve progress in all of these areas that are outlined also by the SDGs as the big challenges of our time? Maybe let's go again in the order of speakers. So Joanita.
Thank you so much. I think for me, the most important thing is engagement of men. We see that men are privileged already, so we might need to make use of that to make sure that some of the decisions are made in favor of women as well. So in case we engage men, then we are able to know that something can be done. Because now I'll also bring it from the household level, where a man is the one who decides what to do, and a woman will follow for sure. But then if we engage these men into the entire process and to show them where we want to go, what we want, and also what we'd like to achieve in regards to gender equality, then I think some of the global issues will be handled. Because we also see, I'll still go back to the UN conference in regards to climate change, where women are really underrepresented in this conference. And so how do we even expect decisions that are favoring women or that are gender sensitive in these spaces? So if you have men know that the women need to be in this space, then I think there's hope for globalization. But also just to bring it to what has been happening with COVID in the last 2 years, COVID has affected everyone. And I normally tell people that, COVID is a health issue, and there was a solution, there's a vaccine, and it's a global issue as well. But climate change is also a global issue. But the difference is there is no vaccine. If it happens, it has happened. The vaccine that we can do at the moment is act already. And so for these global issues, for example, health, climate change, equality, then we have to really come together with all people to engage in the entire process, think together, design policies together, and act on them. Because for me, I believe that when people at the local level are aware of the different atrocities, then we are able to actually get a global impact. Thank you so much.
So the challenge is really to come together and to be inclusive and participatory in your approach. Christoph, from your perspective, what could be the next steps from a detox masculinities perspective on this?
Yeah, well, like Joanita said, the most important thing for me as well is the engagement of men. And it is not the task of women to do all the change work, to do all the awareness work or emotional labor and so on. It is our responsibility as men to break up our toxic behaviors, to leave our male-dominated peer groups, environments, and so on. And yeah, I want to see, I would like to live in a close future, maybe to where we see men fighting on the streets against gender inequality. But to be honest, I cannot see that since the Me Too movement, men take part in feminism, in the feminist discourse in a relevant count. So I'm not that optimistic, but yeah, I promise that I will do everything to take responsibility for myself and all the men I know and all the workshops in the future. So yeah, and to engage men, I think it's to show them what they can win when they leave their what they can win when they leave their male-dominated societies. That they can, yeah, what they can win if they knew. We need to show them new perspectives. Women, female, trans, inter, non-binary perspectives are so more complex, so more emotional, so more well written that I want to see those images in the future, and we need to change our representation for ourselves. That is our task. So that's what we have to do.
Yeah, thank you. I think this connects quite well to what Amy was saying earlier. So to start from yourself and your own perspective at each time, and to reflect about this. Margaret, you were talking also about those, so being in a cooperative environment, so not funding individualistic enterprises again, but really cooperative environments. Do you think this could be something where a better gender equal future might also lie ahead?
Yes, I do. I think that cooperation actually and mutuality and collective effort and solidarity are all important, and they're important both among women and also between men and women, right? So I think that gender is relational. I mean, I agree that you can't have real change in terms of gender equality without men's active participation in dismantling patriarchal structures. But I think that the values that ground the future that I would like to see, and they have to do with gender, but they're not just with gender, are the values of cooperation, mutuality, reciprocity, and mutual respect.
I think that would be a very good basis for constructing our future society. Amy, for the final word from you on the perspectives of gender and re-globalization, where do you see the development going over the next years?
Well, between you and me, from what perspective am I looking at globally? It's a mess. But it's a mess that has to be sorted out. And what I'm seeing is that there are many conversations, local, national, regional, and international happening. The challenge is, how are those conversations happening? What I see is, yes, the issue of war, insecurity, pandemic, and many other Twitter bought over or not bought over is making people question and speak. And when that happens, it drives changes that we want to see. And I hope that I'm leaving a generation or impact on my daughter, my son, that they grow up knowing that there's no difference between them. whether male or female, that they can aspire to do better and be better. And so we can only hope, and wish and act, like Christoph and Margaret have said. So that's where I see it.
Yeah, that I think are some excellent concluding words as well. So really to start a discourse, which I think we have also done here today, and then from this discourse move into perhaps a more action-oriented way, and also into a collaborative and international discourse on gender and re-globalization. So thank you very much to all our panelists today for their insights. And to conclude, let me remind you that our conference continues for the whole week. And my colleague Linda has posted a conference program in the chat here. And you can register there and join us for more webinars, and also for a final panel in presence in Bolzano on Friday. And thank you all for participating. Thank you again to our panelists. And hopefully we'll meet again at some of our next events as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
all.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.